If you're working in a facility right now and a senior leader level, here are some of the questions I'd offer you to consider. Number one, are the colleagues in your building an expense or an asset that can grow? And that is a bottom line fundamental, because rather than being interested in reducing expense, when we know this is an asset that grows, that's where we want to invest.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzloff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage. Hello there. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Culture Change RX. And as promised, we have another amazing guest joining us here today, Doug. And one of the things you'll learn, this is early in our podcast journey, and people will get to notice this later on as episode after episode gets recorded and released. But a lot of our guests have backgrounds in rural healthcare and are very passionate about rural healthcare. And it's one thing I know about Doug. So go ahead, Doug, if you would, and introduce yourself to the audience briefly.
Well, it's great to visit with everybody. I have the classic story, born and raised in a small town and literally educated in a small town, family from there, and had my first experience with kind of what it means to be in healthcare in middle school, where my family had a contract to clean and work in physician clinics, and then had a chance to get exposed to some mentors who were in rural healthcare administration. And for me, it's been a terrific journey of long time involvement in rural hospitals and physician clinics, and more than once probably described as, well, Doug, you're just such a rural zealot. And so it's a proud title I have, because it's an area of healthcare and of community life that's part of my life, and it's where I've remained by choice for a lot of years.
Yeah, rural zealot. I love that. And you should boast that greatly, because it's a good one. I certainly support you in that journey for sure. So I know that right now you're doing some new and equally important things in the industry to be supportive of rural healthcare in particular, maybe other areas of healthcare too. But I think primarily, what are you up to now? Like, what's your main focus right now?
So after a period of decades, frankly, as rural hospital CEO and in various roles, what I do now is I'm a principal with Exec HQ in a healthcare group, and spend my days helping rural facilities craft strategic plans. So I spend my days working primarily with rural critical access hospitals, both senior teams and boards and people who are department directors, trying to bring education and support for new strategies and new activities to take on the things happening out in the environment.
You know, that's another area where we have kind of a common interest. I wear the hat of strategist, in rural healthcare, as you know, and probably many of our listeners do, is that in rural healthcare, we wear many hats. And somehow I wore that strategist hat, or the person that led our organization, that where I was at a community hospital for 22 years. And didn't matter what role I was in, chief nursing officer, chief operating officer, interim CEO, vice president of quality, it didn't matter. They kept that strategist hat on me. And I was the one that led our organization through its strategic planning cycle. One thing I noticed on your bio is I think you talk about Nimble strategic planning, or Nimble strategies. I'm just curious. Like, I'd love you to describe that a little bit more of what it means in your words to be nimble.
Yeah, the word nimble for me is rooted in, frankly, some past strategic planning experiences that ended up with a binder on the shelf. And as busy and as many duties as we have in rural facilities, the idea is to make this real world, actionable frankly, something that actually even connects with your heart and your soul and why you want to go in every day. And that means it has to be able to flex and to change. So nimble is kind of the way we lead the rest of our lives in rural communities, right? We respond to what's going on in the outside world. And so nimble strategic planning for me has been always the promise to people that the net result, candidly, is not going to be a 5-inch binder of data that will look good on the shelf. And others may have had different experiences, but I can tell you, I've gone to facilities in a new role, for example, as administrator, and literally in and on the bookshelf is the old binder of what was called that strategic plan. And when people's starting points are jammed calendars, busy days, Nimble has really meant make it real and give people, what I describe as the skills to actually do some of the activities. And so it's the ability to flex it and change it, I think, has made a difference for me. And that's what we try to do for people. So,
really kind of making it executable, doable, adjustable along the way, kind of that in our world of transformation, we kind of call that study adjust. Like if you said, I always like to say you got to have a plan so you can adjust it a little bit and tweak it along the way, because we rarely get it right the first time, but it's a process, right? A nimble one. I'm just wondering from your viewpoint, because, we both sat in this role of strategist, either internally in our organizations, guiding the planning and the execution of strategy, and now serving as a helper to others to do that. I'm just wondering, how does culture become part of the strategic conversation? So this is a podcast about culture. So let's connect the dots here. How have you seen culture become part of the strategic conversation? Or, maybe surprisingly, sometimes it isn't, I just love to hear what you've been seeing out there.
Absolutely. There's a direct line from culture to strategy. And my experience, what I've seen and what I still see, it boils down to strategy is, in our minds, supposed to be a set of activities that can create value for the people we serve. And the question then is, what are the kind of daily beliefs and behaviors we have that will allow us to do those things? And so for me, culture has always been, what are our beliefs and therefore behaviors and habits we've always had? And do those match what we need to be doing tomorrow and next week? And so finding a way to help prepare and tool up people so that they have the skills to behave and act a little differently is the path to strategy. And without that step of focusing on giving people the new skills, my experience, Sue, is that people are loyal to learning. We know there's a lot of question about staffing and attracting and retaining. But one thing most people are always loyal to is their own learning and the energy that comes from actually seeing progress. And so the culture strategy tie is about having the actual skills. Nothing worse than having somebody show up and say, well, here's our new strategy. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, without talking about your jammed calendar or the fact that maybe nobody's ever shown you how to do X, Y, and Z. So that step is what we try to do, to tie those activities to what we're doing every day as our culture. And so we can become known by that and attract people who want to do that, and excite people who are already there but have learned a new way to do it. And it's an absolute thrill to be a part of that when that starts to go well. And frankly, as you've seen, I'm sure we've both seen, and when that is disconnected, then you get the dusty binder on the shelf, because I'll just do the stuff I've always done because nobody tooled me up. Has that kind of been your experience as well?
Yes. Yeah. And I don't want to get too common in some of the conversation or words or phrases I hear out there, but it does kind of make the point is, culture seems like the soft stuff. and things like market share and new service lines and new technology and new buildings. And when you try to facilitate the conversation around what is the strategic direction you want to take the culture, when you start bringing that up, it does seem like soft stuff.
It's a challenge, as we know, for everybody, whether or not you're a CEO or one of the C-suite folks or a department director. As strategy's a little harder, at least effective strategy, to put your arms around. It isn't always a to-do list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's insight. It's thinking. It's asking questions, not always having the answers. We're getting a lot done. The question is, are we getting the right things done to create value? So we use some tools to help people tame the calendar beast and then start to define what we want kind of out there in the world. And then what are some of the focused specific steps? And, Sue, another thing to your point, the culture is everything, because historically, my experience is we haven't done a good job making trade-offs for our colleagues. We ask them to do everything at the same time. So a big theme is we try to create a culture of trade-offs. We know we can't do it all at once. And when we try to, we've both seen it, frankly, and I've lived it, we create an animal that then devours us, right? Which isn't doing anybody any. So the culture.
We created that animal ourselves.
Yeah, we actually created this thing ourselves to watch it. And so it's so beautiful when people start to learn new skills, try different things, and have permission to go ahead and change the culture. You can see it. It's something you can feel, and it magnetizes. People want to be a part of that. We all do, right? If I think of myself. And so that's, again, that kind of necessary requisite of culture, that we even know what we're going to have to look like to do what we want to do. An example I'll toss out is, recently working with a facility that wants to grow. That's typical. Start some new services. And yet, the truth is, in that rural facility, the directors who were in the roles had never once been taught how to do a business plan, any sort of training, because they were just serving in the roles they grew into or were asked to take over. And that's, for me, a passion point. Where we are today, where we want to go, but have we really armed folks to get where they need to go? And when we don't do that, we know the culture is where it always was. And it's frustrating to people. That's been one of the big joys of this, is being able to really teach people what they now need to know. Because, again, people are loyal to that learning, and they're appreciative when senior leaders focus on culture. Has been my experience. I'm sure the same for yours as well.
Yes. Oh, gosh, yes. I just can see so many examples of what you just mentioned. And I think that's just a really important point of emphasis, is just like frontline managers sometimes haven't been given the tools and the education and the development to build a new program. Yeah, they agree it'll be fun and be exciting to do it, but they almost feel like they're set up to fail. It can be like that too, is, when we're trying to create a place where we're a provider of choice or employer of choice. Those are two big strategies that speak to culture a lot. Culture is kind of the pathway to being those two things. In fact, there are two red indicators I have that if there's a poor reputation of the hospital or the healthcare organization in the community as an employer or as a provider or both, there's probably a culture answer to that more than anything. But to the line of the frontline manager again, to elevate the behavior and the performance of their people to deliver care and services to that level where they're a magnet for patients, to recommend them, return, choose them over others. Frontline managers have a huge role in that. They're closest to the patients. They're closest to those employees doing that work that impacts that reputation of the organization as an employer and as a provider.
To your
and
point,
just like, they need the skills.
Yeah. I was
They
going to
need
say,
the skills.
one of the readiness questions we'll ask is, senior leaders in a board, we ask a number of questions, but here's one of them. What business are you in? And it's always interesting to see how different those answers are. We lean deeply to the general answer to that is we're in the people business. And it is, for me, always been fascinating to hear the different answers because, to your point and to what we're talking about, cultural development, if we don't agree what business we're in, no wonder it's hard to get people excited. And so part of our early assessment is we're in the people business, which means we're going to invest in people. And that's the investment in learning and trying some new things in baby steps. So there are tools to kind of take baby steps to work your way out of that toward things that show progress, which is what energizes people. I've had those periods, I'm sure you have too, where, boy, okay, I can get up even an hour earlier now at 5 a.m. to check emails and check them till 10 o'clock at night, but I'm not seeing progress. And we're huge believers in setting strategies that can show some progress and build on those baby steps. And it's great fun when people decide they're in that people business. And so that's what we're going to build to get where we need to go. And the reverse is also true.
Yeah.
But for those who make that commitment, that we can both think of a lot of examples of the magic that happens when you make that investment.
We talk about the wearing many hats and those, especially those frontline managers, they have to keep day-to-day operations humming, problem solve, the equipment or supply issues of the day, the staffing issues of the day, those kind of things. But at the same time, they have to be working on developing their people and moving projects forward and progress that you mentioned that is desired in those baby steps forward. They even in small steps feel like they don't have time for that and energy for that because we call it the whirlwind, very busy and very demanding. And so to your point of the trade-offs, we have to say, oh, let me stop doing this or change doing this a new way. So instead of that add on, it's kind of a change or replace something else because at a certain point, you just can't add on anymore.
We spend a lot of time with a lot of facilities talking about a strategy around this concept to optimize. That is, let's do well and more efficiently what we're currently doing. Like we mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, Sue, there's always this temptation to go to the new shiny object.
I know.
The experience I've had is what leads to the jammed calendars and long to-do lists. And instead, really have a conversation at the senior level and at the leadership level. How do we deliberately give permission to make some trade-offs? And my own passion point is that is very effective. When we even start talking about the word trade-off, it changes the culture. And it's hard for folks because our traditional definition is yes to everything. I've been a CEO for a long time in rural communities, and I know there's this urge to say yes to everything. I also know what that does to the culture. And by that, I mean, when people are so busy, they're on the run and can't think, there are paths forward to slow that down through these trade-offs. There's specific tools. There's this thing called the Eisenhower matrix. There are calendar management tools that are born in this trade-off. We can have everything we want, just not at the same time. That's how we start to slow down and create time in our strategic process that we use with facilities by being very careful. We start where people are today, not 10 steps ahead, and make sure we understand how we'll get people there with baby steps. That's been something that's worked very well in my career, and it's worked well in this latest phase where we try to help other hospitals go through the journey to set the right activities going forward.
Yes. Now I was thinking, given your experience in rural healthcare and in being a CEO and in your career as well, can you think of an example where there was kind of like a before and after story where you're like, wow, the culture was part of what changed. It wasn't just like a new tower, a new building, or a new service line, or robotics or something. There wasn't something like that, but it was like maybe it was some of those things, but also you'd say there's a before and after, that the culture used to be this and now it's that. Do you have any of those stories, or at least one that kind of is top of mind?
Yeah, I'll tell you one that's related to what I mentioned before, and that is I've lived this both myself as CEO and now helped other organizations. But one theme that has come up repeatedly is when the normal is directors who sometimes are maybe a little early in their role or haven't been blessed with some mentoring or seasoning or education, and suddenly you're running departments. And I'll give an example where, in our case, yep, we need to grow. We need financials to improve. We need quality, all the usual pressures people hear. And as an example, the facility I'm referring to, we also didn't have tax support and we had to live on only what we brought in. So it was a very high need to be efficient. And so that was kind of the normal. Well, the event it's sort of this until one day, some of the leaders said to me, you want me to grow and start that new service. I don't have any idea what you were talking about. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, which is, in my mind, I knew what I was talking about. But what a learning for me that this person was very willing, but had never been afforded the support and someone to show how to get there. And that particular facility, the joy was, as people learned some of those tools, as CEO, I didn't have to dream up the new services. People were actually bringing business plan summaries forward to work on with us. And we got actually more ideas, not fewer, Sue, because people knew how to spot opportunities. And then I had stories, speaking of culture, people said, well, gosh, I showed my son how to do this because he wants to start a pizza restaurant in town. Fantastic. Now we're all better off because we're learning about how to launch a new venture or some new skill that we forget it impacts people's lives and their families, not just them. And so we were locked in the classic, grow, find a way to grow, until, again, that day, which was, let's do something different. And that's become a perennial top 20 facility now, with its marks and its growth because of this demonstration of, look at the magic when we actually tool people up with what they need for the new world. And really one of the most exciting things. And you can repeat that. And the fun part is this is doable. We got this if we put our minds to it, in a world that's very, what's the right word? It seems like a lot's out of our control. In my experience, if we choose, these things are in our control, and that's very exciting if we give it a try.
Seems very empowering to, one, be taught and supported to learn and grow in this way. But then your example of what happened after was they felt very empowered to then not just use it in the very specific situation in which it was taught to be used probably initially, but then to say, now what? What else? I now have a new skill, and not just internally, but externally. I find that in rural healthcare, mainly because it's small enough, we can wrap our arms around our community. We can see more evidence of how our community healthcare systems ripple of impact from the employees to their families or their other businesses or stuff. But I remember in our local community, when our hospital really went from being one that was kind of spiraling downward to one that was then really known as the employer of choice, the provider of choice, great service, great quality, great reputation, growing, flourishing. I remember other businesses looking at that as a model and saying, wow, we need to step it up. Like if our local hospital can be a shining star for service and quality and growth, maybe we can too. I remember
Exactly.
seeing those examples, and it reminded me of that when you said about the pizza business.
Yes, it's exactly that. This whole idea of what it can do for a culture clearly shapes the community. And that's, I think, what brings people alive, because that's why people got into this. People want to serve and have an impact. And I don't mean to sound naive about this, but I deeply believe that makes a huge difference in attracting talent and retaining talent,
Oh,
because I've seen it with my own four
mhm.
eyes year
Me
over
too.
year that when people
Mhm.
are learning and people are trying new things and they're safe in doing it, they will work their hearts out and you feel like you're
Mhm.
part of something. And that's the
Yeah.
difference in this kind of strategic approach. There's a lot of ways you can develop a plan so you feel great about it and put it up on the old shelf. But this notion
Mhm.
of really helping people see where they are and where they can go can be remarkable. In fact, some folks have to see it to believe it. There are facilities doing this very well, as you know, the facilities you've worked to help.
Oh,
Helping people see a spirit of the possible is a big part of my role now. That I can only say because I've lived it. I can say
yeah.
over time things happen.
I think one of the things that you've said today that really resonates with me, but I know it will with others, is that once you have a strategy in place, when you go to execute on it, one of the things you need to consider beyond budget and funding it and what resources are going to be needed is what learning is going to be needed. What are the things that we don't know? So let's say you have a big strategy to be top ranking, award winning in the patient experience and to be a high reliable organization. A lot of that's cultural more than it's buying widgets or building buildings and stuff. And there's learning needs involved with that at a management and staff and other level. And so really then to execute on it, you have to say, what do we need to learn to succeed at executing this plan? And what do people need to learn?
Well, I'd offer up some discussion questions right off the bat from this conversation. If you're working in a facility right now and a senior leader level, here are some of the questions I'd offer you to consider. Number one, are the colleagues in your building an expense or an asset that can grow? And that is a bottom line fundamental, because rather than being interested in reducing expense, when we know this is an asset that grows, that's where we want to invest. My starting point assessment question for people often is, assume we're in the people business for a moment. Doesn't additional investment help us get where we want to grow? And people will say, well, there's a lot of things around that, but I would offer our
Yeah,
experience.
but
Then, get where you want to grow, you'll have to invest in the asset, and it's a winning investment over time, 100% of the time. So that's to your point, kind of those first things for strategy is taking an assessment of where you are, philosophy, and then allocating the resources and making the trade-offs. That's the beginning of the journey, is just acknowledging we're going to start making some trade-offs and investing to work on the things maybe we do now. Maybe we get our best growth, however we want to define it, by optimizing what we do now. And I tell folks, I'll bet you a pizza. What has always happened with me is more and better ideas come from the frontline colleagues, because they're there. And it always relied on just a few of us to come up with these new ideas. Imagine the whole building having more skills at opportunity recognition, and that's culture. In our minds, that path forward is rooted in investment in that level of culture to get to the execution we need.
that deference to expertise, that's spoken about in high reliability. We call it do it with them, not to them. It's way easier. A lot of the stuff that we need to execute right on the front lines that change how people work daily, whether it's the processes or the behaviors of how they work daily with patients or with each other to make that happen, that's happening on the front lines. And if that needs to change in any way to get a better outcome or more value, they know the answers. And if it needs to change, they can shepherd that change easier than a leader saying, hey, we're going to do it a new, better way. That
Right.
usually is like a lead balloon, as you know.
Exactly. And the other for people to think about is, what are the other alternatives? More of the same. The part that's kind of ignites passion for people, the other part of strategy we work very hard on, is it has to show some new insight. Doing a new way is what will actually generate some energy. If we are simply doing what we have gotten to this point, we're perfectly designed for our results, right? So if we can make some changes, we change the culture, and that's then what we build on. And it's a snowball effect. Baby step,
Yeah.
and let it sort of snowball. And if you compare that to what it currently is, that's kind of a nice place to be as a rural facility, or any facility really in healthcare, rather than letting all the other actors do those culture changes, frankly, kind of at our expense. They benefit from the value we create. We're trying to create value and keep a little more for ourselves. That's the exciting part of good strategy and effective strategy over time, frankly.
It is. It is. This has been such a great, meaty conversation. There's just some gems in here from your years of experience and wisdom on this topic. And I would love to kind of close out this wonderful conversation and very helpful conversation with maybe another gem from you, Doug. Is there anything like that you want to add to our conversation before we close it out here today?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. My own experience was I was overwhelmed, frankly, in whatever role I was doing in a rural hospital, with the daily tasks and the jam calendar, and didn't feel like there was progress. So my overarching message is there is a better and different way personally. There are opportunities to tame the calendar. There are opportunities to get the right things done that don't require more early mornings and later nights. And so my first message is there are proven paths forward to tame that beast. And what one could do now, in my view, what's a step you could do even after listening to this podcast, is to take a piece of paper and a pencil, the old-fashioned way, and write down what it is you as a leader, whatever your role is in that facility, what do you want or think you need to learn? Write your own learning plan. It could be a simple handwritten plan, because most of us know the gaps between what we're being asked to do and what we frankly can do easily. So write out what it is you think you need to learn with a development plan, and then present that to try to get resources toward it. I think that's a good, solid first step, that fundamentally you got this if you're given the tools. So let's tame the calendar and let's see what we need to learn. And that is transformative over time and accelerates better results. That's my 2 cents after about 3 decades in the business, working in rural areas as a zealot, a true rural zealot, by the way.
A true rural zealot. Yes. Some people are going to listen to this, Doug, later than the date of when this is published in March, but you and I are going to collaborate together again on event coming up. So we're going to be doing a 2-part series. So in the show notes under today's podcast, I'm going to be putting that, and it's coming up real soon. And I wanted to put a plug in for that because I've enjoyed this conversation, and I'm really going to enjoy our upcoming co-presentation to dig in deeper specifically on some of the tools that we couldn't talk about today that leads to great planning and great execution. And from our background, primarily in rural healthcare, because you're a rural zealot.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Looking forward to it, Sue, very much. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you for your time, Doug. And I appreciate your contributions to this amazing industry called healthcare. It's been something that we've committed a lot of our lives to. And it's nice that we can use this forum to share some of our lessons. Thank you so much for being willing to do so.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.